At 55, your portfolio has reached its highest point ever. And for the very first time in your entire investing journey, that scale is actually working against you. Not because you've accumulated too much, but because the rules around what happens to that money have shifted completely, and no one bothered to tell you. The approach of investing more that built your wealth between 35 and 55 will actively destroy that wealth between 55 and 73 if you continue running the same playbook. Let me be specific about what I'm actually claiming here. I am not telling you to stop investing. What I'm saying is that the particular strategy of funneling additional dollars into the same tax-deferred accounts with the same aggressive equity allocation, operating on the assumption that you'll work until 65 and withdraw comfortably on your own schedule. That strategy carries roughly a 60% probability of breaking down. Not from bad fortune, from mathematics, timing, and three forces that switch on at 55 that were completely beside the point at 35. And I'm going to walk you through all three with real numbers. I've operated a business for more than a decade. I've had accountants, tax attorneys, and financial strategists sitting across from me explaining precisely how money moves in the second half of a career. I have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars invested personally right now. I have real exposure here. And the thing that caught me most off guard when I went deep into the retirement mathematics wasn't anything complicated or obscure. It was how thoroughly conventional wisdom fails the exact people it claims to serve, the ones who actually did things right early on and built something genuinely worth protecting. Here is the mental image I want you to carry through this entire video, because I'm going to return to it every time the math snaps into focus. Picture your retirement savings as a garden. You've been planting and tending it for 30 years. At 55, it is the most flourishing garden you've ever grown. Rows of green, everything you put in showing up as tangible, visible wealth. And right now, someone is telling you to plant everything. Go maximum. Press every seed into the ground while the opportunity still exists. Here is what they're leaving out. It's October. You have perhaps 10 weeks of growing season remaining before the first frost arrives. The most experienced gardeners at 55 aren't frantically pushing more seeds into the soil. They are rethinking the harvest, and if you plant everything you have in October, the frost takes all of it. The October garden. That's the framework. Hold on to it. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you something about required minimum distributions that will make you genuinely irritated at whoever told you to maximize your 401k through your final working decade. But first, let me show you why the timing of your returns matters more than the total size of your portfolio, and why that single insight changes everything about what investing more actually accomplishes. After 55, you assume the dollar amount is the problem. The real problem is the sequence. Here is a thought experiment that Wade Pfau, a professor of retirement income at the American College of Financial Services, explored in his research. Two retirees hold identical portfolios and generate the same average return across 20 years, yet still arrive at dramatically different ending balances, simply because one experienced losses early while the other encountered them later. Same money, same average return, different sequence. Completely different outcomes, and Pfau's research directly measured the magnitude of this effect. The compounded return in the first 10 years of retirement accounts for approximately 77% of the final retirement outcome. 77%. The entire second half of your retirement is shaped by what unfolds in the first 10 years, not by the raw size of your portfolio at the starting line. This is where the October garden concept begins to make genuine sense. When you're 35 and the market falls 30%, that frost is frustrating but not fatal. Your paycheck keeps arriving. When you're still in the accumulation phase, market declines are actually opportunities. A 30% drop at 35 is largely irrelevant noise by the time you reach 55. You acquire more shares at reduced prices. You wait. Compounding absorbs the loss and then exceeds it. But when you are withdrawing, the arithmetic reverses entirely. A 30% decline in year 2 of retirement means you are locking in losses every single time you sell shares to generate income. The portfolio never receives a fair opportunity to recover. The American College of Financial Services identified what they call the retirement risk zone. the final 10 years of your working life combined with the first 10 years of retirement. This 20-year span is when accumulated savings are simultaneously at their peak and most exposed to permanent damage. At 55, you are sitting squarely in the middle of it. This vulnerability exists because there is simply insufficient time for an asset to recover compared to assets that might experience the same negative movement more than a decade before retirement. Now consider what happened to people who retired in early 2025. The S&P 500 delivered roughly 17.9% on a total return basis for the year. But the index fell nearly 19% in the first half of 2025 before recovering to finish solidly positive. Anyone who retired in March of that year and immediately began drawing income got the painful half first. They sold shares near the bottom to cover rent, then watched those identical shares recover to record highs. But they had already sold them. That is sequence risk playing out in the real world. And this is precisely where conventional advice breaks down entirely. Most people assume more stocks equals more growth equals more spending capacity. The data says the opposite during the risk zone. Research from Morningstar showed that the highest sustainable withdrawal rates came from portfolios holding 30 to 50% in equities, not 70 or 80%. The additional equity exposure adds volatility, and in the wrong sequence, that volatility consumes withdrawals. So, what does investing more after 55 actually mean within this context? If you are directing additional dollars into equity-heavy tax-deferred accounts at 55 because someone advised you to maximize the growth decade before retirement, you are planting more seeds in October. You are expanding the size of the position now sitting inside the highest risk window of your entire financial life. More seeds, same frost exposure, larger potential loss. There is a story about a farmer, not someone I know personally, but the kind of account that circulates in actuarial circles because it captures something that is mathematically true. He spent 40 years building a farm. Every year he reinvested everything back into it. At 62, he had the most productive soil he'd ever worked, the finest equipment, the greatest capacity he'd ever had. And someone convinced him to plant every acre he owned that October, right before an unusually early frost hit that year. He lost 60% of what he'd planted. The soil was never the problem. It was extraordinary soil. The problem was what he planted, when he planted it, and the fact that he hadn't protected a single acre. His neighbor, working identical soil, planted 60% of his land and kept 40% in cold storage from the prior harvest, and came through entirely fine. The difference was not work ethic. The difference was not even net worth. It was understanding that October operates by its own rules. The October Garden. By the way, if you're finding this valuable, please subscribe. Otherwise, the algorithm may stop putting these videos in front of you entirely. Now, here is the part I promised would make you angry. I meant that. Stay with me because this next section reshapes everything about how you should be thinking about a 401k contribution at 55. Here is what nobody mentions when they encourage you to maximize pre-tax retirement contributions throughout your 50s. There is an uninvited guest arriving at your retirement party at age 73. His name is required minimum distribution. He does not knock. He does not ask permission. Once you reach age 73, you must begin taking annual RMDs from all tax-deferred retirement accounts, including 401k plans, 403b plans, and similar workplace retirement accounts. The IRS mandates a minimum withdrawal every single year, calculated by dividing your December 31st account balance by your applicable life expectancy factor. You cannot defer it. You cannot delay taking your RMD. There have been only 2 single-year exceptions to this requirement, one during the 2009 financial crisis and one at the height of the pandemic in 2020. That is it. Everyone else pays without exception. Here is where the mathematics become genuinely punishing. Using the IRS Uniform Lifetime Table Divisor of 26.5 at age 73, a $1.5 million balance produces a required distribution of $56,604. That is just year one. But the Uniform Lifetime Table Divisor shrinks each subsequent year. 25.5 at 74, 24.6 at 75, 23.7 at 76, and continues tightening into the 80s. Your forced withdrawal grows larger every year against a portfolio that may simultaneously be shrinking due to market conditions entirely outside your control. Run the schedule from 73 through 90 and cumulative RMDs on a $1.5 million portfolio approach, $1.4 million in total distributions. Every dollar of that is taxed as ordinary income, not at capital gains rates, not at any preferential rate, at whatever marginal bracket all of that forced income pushes you into. And if Social Security is already in payment by then, which it almost certainly will be, adding $56,000 or $70,000 or $90,000 in mandatory withdrawals begins making a portion of your Social Security benefit taxable as well. The government is legally double collecting, fully sanctioned by a tax code specifically engineered with this outcome in mind. Required minimum distributions allow the government to tax money that has been sheltered inside retirement accounts, potentially for decades. After that extended period of compounding, the government wants its portion, and the RMD mechanism guarantees it gets there. Now consider what this means for someone who followed their financial advisor's guidance between 55 and 65 and aggressively maximized pre-tax 401k contributions across those 10 years. They grew a substantially larger balance, which generates substantially larger RMDs, which creates a much bigger tax event beginning at 73. And if you delay your very first RMD to April 1st of the following year, you will be required to take 2 RMDs within the same calendar year. The prior year's distribution by April 1st and the current year's by December 31st. That double distribution can push you into a higher tax bracket than either withdrawal would have on its own. And if you have never executed a Roth conversion between now and then, you will spend years returning to the IRS money you spent decades carefully accumulating. There's a particular parable that fits this perfectly. A merchant in 18th century London ran a system allowing his best customers to defer all payments until the end of their lives. The customers loved the arrangement. They could acquire everything immediately, pay nothing immediately, and grow their enterprises using deferred purchasing power. But the deferred obligation didn't disappear. It compounded. And at the end of their lives, the estates owed not merely the original amounts, but decades of accumulated interest. The merchant's heirs became extraordinarily wealthy. The customer's heirs paid the bill. The 401k is not a gift from the government. It is a deferred payment arrangement. And the longer you wait to begin converting portions of it to Roth, the larger the bill you are signing on behalf of your future self. The October garden has a hidden rule. Frost does not care how many seeds you planted, it charges you for every single one simultaneously. Here is the honest acknowledgement that never makes it into a retirement calculator. You can absorb everything I just said, understand it completely, and still take no action. Because recognizing a risk and constructing a system around it are two entirely separate challenges. A digital book called The Exit Code was built from the ground up using 50 years of actual retirement data, distilled into a mathematical framework for determining precisely when and how you can leave the workforce on your terms rather than the markets. One chapter focuses specifically on what is called the dynamic withdrawal method, a framework that replaces the static 4% rule with something that genuinely accounts for the sequence of returns problem just described. Morningstar's December 2025 research, incidentally, placed the optimal withdrawal rate for people retiring in 2026 at 3.9%, not 4%, which means the rule you were likely planning around is already slightly miscalibrated before you even begin. The book also walks through what is called the 58% rule, the reality that roughly 3 in 5 workers exit the workforce earlier than planned, usually involuntarily, and the buffer strategy that protects you when that scenario unfolds in your own life. It costs less than dinner out. The link is in the description. Now, the invisible expense, the one that will absolutely force you to liquidate assets at the worst possible moment if you haven't prepared for it. And with the calendar moving into 2026, this particular cost just became larger than it has been in years. Healthcare before Medicare? That gap between whenever you actually stop working and age 65. Health insurance represents one of the largest expenses individuals face when they retire before Medicare eligibility. Monthly premiums of roughly $1,000 to $1,100 per person can meaningfully compress how long retirement savings hold up, particularly when layered on top of housing, food, and transportation costs. But those figures reflect last year. Here are this year's numbers. At age 60, you could be paying $19,176 annually for health coverage if you are purchasing your own plan without employer subsidies or income-based discounts. Health insurance carries an average monthly cost of $1,691 at age 62 and $1,766 per month at age 64 for a single individual. Now double those figures for a couple. Two people in their early 60s, both without employer coverage, retiring without access to a group plan, and assuming they'll manage fine because they have savings. They are looking at roughly $40,000 per year in health insurance premiums before a single copay, deductible, or prescription is added. For 2026, the out-of-pocket maximum for marketplace plans cannot exceed $10,600 for an individual and $21,200 for a family. That is the ceiling on additional exposure beyond premiums. For a couple, total potential exposure in a single difficult health year reaches $61,200 purely in insurance-related costs. And here is what became significantly worse specifically in 2026. At the close of 2025, the enhanced premium tax credits that had been suppressing ACA marketplace premiums since 2021 expired and were not extended. For early retirees, this means the subsidy cliff at 400% of the federal poverty level has returned in full. Anyone earning above roughly $62,600 as a single person in 2026 now pays the complete unsubsidized market price for coverage, which can exceed $1,500 per month at age 62 in certain rating areas. Most people who retire at 62 carrying a solid portfolio will have income above that threshold from portfolio withdrawals, dividends, and perhaps a modest pension, which means they pay the full rate, which means the savings they are living on gets steadily drained month after month into insurance costs before the market even has an opportunity to inflict damage. Think about what this generates in sequence of returns terms. You need $40,000 annually for healthcare. You are retired. Your only income source is your portfolio. A market correction strikes in year 2 of retirement. Your portfolio drops 20%, but the $40,000 obligation remains unchanged. So you sell shares near the bottom to cover the premium. You are permanently locking in losses to satisfy a cost that compounds against you every single year until age 65. This is the frost consuming the October garden in real time. There is a plumber, a real account from a financial planner's client base, shared as an anonymized case study, who retired at 62 with $500,000 saved. For a working-class individual, that figure represented more than 30 years of careful financial discipline. He was proud of what he had built. His financial advisor told him he was on track. What nobody modeled was the healthcare cost. In his very first year of retirement, he paid $22,000 in premiums and out-of-pocket medical expenses. The market declined that same year. He sold $38,000 in fund shares at a loss to cover his total expenses. By year 3, his $500,000 had contracted to $380,000, not because of poor investment choices, because of a cost he had never accounted for, arriving during a sequence of returns that hit him immediately and hard. He returned to work at 64, not by preference, but because the numbers left him no alternative. This is the retirement system functioning precisely as designed. The fund companies collected their fees. The insurance companies collected their premiums. The IRS will collect RMDs beginning at 73. The only participant who failed to receive what they planned for was the one who trusted generic advice and relied on a 4% withdrawal rate built on assumptions from 1994. The October garden is sending a clear signal. More seeds is not the answer. The frost does not negotiate. Let me now walk you through a narrative that runs beneath all of this, because I want you to understand this is not theoretical. Call him Derek. Derek is 56. He works in project management at a mid-sized company where he has been employed for 11 years. His 401k balance is $280,000. He has been contributing the maximum amount since turning 51, including the catch-up contribution, which currently stands at $8,000 annually for those over 50, layered on top of the standard $23,500 limit. If you are 50 or older, you can contribute an additional $1,000 to an IRA and $8,000 to a 401k or 403b in catch-up contributions for 2026. Derek read that guidance and thought, perfect. I'll maximize every dollar every year I have remaining. He is planning to work until 65. He is 9 years away. He feels secure in his position. Here is what Derek does not yet know. I will come back to him shortly. First, let me describe the third problem, the one that compounds the impact of everything else because it eliminates the single assumption your entire plan rests on. The assumption that you control when you stop working. A 2024 report from the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies found that nearly 3 out of 5 retirees left the workforce sooner than they had anticipated. 3 out of 5. Not a rounding error. Not a statistical outlier. A clear majority. And it was not because they grew bored of working. Approximately 5 years separates what Americans intend and what actually occurs. Non-retirees identify 66 as their target retirement age. Most actually retire at 61. That gap is driven predominantly by unplanned departures. 24% of people over 50 who experience a layoff never re-enter the workforce. 1 in 4, not temporarily sidelined, but permanently separated from employment, typically converting to early Social Security at a permanent 30% reduction in monthly benefits for the remainder of their lives. For workers between 55 and 64, the average duration of unemployment is nearly 26 weeks, almost 7 weeks longer than it is for workers aged 25 to 34. For men in that older bracket, it extends further still, 33 weeks or more than 8 months. And the trajectory is deteriorating rather than improving. In 2024, the EEOC received 16,223 charges of age discrimination, an increase from 14,144 in 2023 and 11,500 in 2022, representing a 40% rise in just 3 years. Approximately 64% of workers aged 50 and above report having personally witnessed or experienced age discrimination in the workplace. 22% report feeling actively pushed out of their current position because of their age. Here is the implication. The investment plan most people construct at 55, aggressive contributions, equity-heavy allocation, 10-year runway, controlled exit at 65, carries a 60% probability of not unfolding as designed. The timeline gets interrupted. The portfolio must begin distributing earlier than projected. The healthcare gap stretches longer than anticipated. The sequence of returns damage arrives during the forced exit rather than on the planned schedule. And the RMD liability was set in motion at 58, while they were reflexively maximizing the pre-tax account, and it detonates at 73 regardless of everything that occurred in between. You think the problem is the dollar amount. The actual problem is that you are engineering a plan around conditions you will likely never control. Derek discovers this at 59, restructuring. His position is eliminated. He has $280,000 in a pre-tax 401k, no access to Medicare for 6 more years, and the enhanced ACA tax credits that existed when he assembled his retirement plan have expired. He is looking at roughly $19,000 annually in marketplace health insurance premiums at his age and income level. He has 2 options. Take an early withdrawal from the 401k and absorb the 10% penalty plus ordinary income tax, or drain his after-tax savings first while watching his pre-tax balance grow into an even larger RMD obligation at 73. The thing about October is that the frost does not wait for you to be ready. Now, let me attach real numbers to a realistic scenario so you can actually see yourself in this. Marcus is 55. He earns $95,000 annually. He has $280,000 accumulated across a 401k and a traditional IERA. He has been contributing consistently, though not at maximum levels. His financial advisor just told him, "The next 10 years are critical. Maximize every available contribution. You have catch-up contributions available to you now. Use them aggressively. Marcus wants to retire at 65. He trusts the guidance. He begins directing $31,500 annually into pre-tax accounts at the maximum allowable level. In scenario A, Marcus follows this advice for 10 years and retires at 65, exactly as planned. His balance at 65, assuming a 7% average annual return, reaches approximately $800,000. Under the 4% rule, that produces $32,000 per year in withdrawals. Add Social Security, approximately $18,000 annually if he claims at 65. He is living on $50,000 per year, manageable if tight. Then age 73 arrives. His balance has grown to roughly $1,200,000 if he has been conservative with withdrawals. His first RMD is $45,283, taxed as ordinary income, stacked on top of his Social Security. His Social Security benefit becomes partially taxable. His Medicare premiums are subject to IRMAA surcharges if his total income crosses $85,000. The government is collecting on a debt Marcus never knew he had signed. In scenario B, Marcus at 55 divides his contributions strategically. He directs $15,000 into his pre-tax 401k to capture the full employer match, and simultaneously begins moving money from his traditional IRA into a Roth account through annual conversions, deliberately staying within the 22% tax bracket without crossing into a higher one. He builds a liquidity cushion in a taxable brokerage account holding 1 full year of living expenses. He gradually shifts his asset allocation from 70/30 equities to bonds toward 50/50 as he approaches 60, constructing a cash and bond ladder specifically designed to cover the first 2 years of retirement without requiring any equity sales. The total dollars invested are nearly identical to scenario A, but the tax structure, the liquidity position, and the sequence of returns exposure are fundamentally different. In scenario B, if Marcus is laid off at 60, he does not panic sell equities, he draws from the cash buffer. His Roth account grows tax-free and carries no RMD requirement. His taxable events at 73 are dramatically smaller, and if he does need to withdraw during a market downturn, he takes from the bond ladder first, not from equities. He does not absorb the frost, he has a greenhouse. The difference between scenario A and scenario B is not how much Marcus invested. It is the structure of that investment. It is the management of sequence exposure. It is the October garden being planted with cold weather crops rather than summer tomatoes. This is a good moment to say something plainly. The financial media and the retirement industry share a mutual interest in telling you to invest more. More assets under management generates more fees.